Can I get a hallelujah? Yeah, that was pretty good. Wow, you guys are taking it up a notch. I love it. I love it. My goodness, we're learning how to dance. Who would have ever thought that that would be the case? You know, I have to admit this. I love the exuberance of some churches, and I would like us to be a little bit more active. That would be fun, but I feel really awkward when I dance. Really, really awkward. Yeah. Especially when I'm with House of Mercy Church, and it's like a bunch of people who were obviously born to dance. Let's just say I was not born to dance. We'll leave it at that. All right, we're going to take a look for a few minutes here at the Word of God. We're going to wrap up our series on the cross today, talking about the cross and resurrection. We're going to start off with a picture of a hallway. All right, everybody give it up for this hallway. That was not as exciting as the hallelujah. Well, you'll be excited in a minute. Maybe I'll ask you to give it up for this hallway after you know what it is. So this is actually a very important space for me. So I became a follower of Jesus when I was 20 years old, and God had arranged for me to actually spend the whole next year. I was in university at the time. I had already set up to spend my whole next year in England. So I became a Christian, but I didn't really believe the Bible or any of that stuff fully yet. But I had given my life to Christ in a very minimal sense. And then I immediately was taken away from all of my friends, everybody who was around me, and I found myself in England. And this is the hallway in the church that I ended up going to there. Lots of things happened there to me. I met people who were just really digging into the Bible, took classes, started to understand who Jesus was and what the Bible says about him. I met this guy, Tony, who's a pastor there, and what I'm going to tell you about this hallway happened with Tony. And Tony took me through a Bible study. He was leading a Bible study in a pub, which I thought was really cool, right? Because I thought Christians were all about just a bunch of rules, but that's not the case. Christians are not about rules. Christians are about Jesus. So my whole life was changed in the span of the 9 months that I was there. My outlook on the world was completely different. I came to a deep realization of the fundamental truth that Jesus really is the Son of God, that he really did die for my sin a couple of thousand years ago, and that he actually came back to life from the dead. And I had a moment, much like many of you have had, much like the apostles had when they first saw him, where it turned my world upside down. If that's true, then the whole way of living that our culture says, hey, do this, doesn't make any sense. Everything's different if that's true. So anyway, it was the end of the year, and Tony had baptized me, actually in the Thames River, which is interesting. And so that was a fantastic moment for me. And now I was about to leave. So this is my last day at church. This is not a picture of that day. This is just a picture of the hallway that I was in that day. And what happened is, it was one of those moments, it was after church, and we were milling around like everybody does here, like we're going to be doing outside today. That's going to be fun, right? It's going to be a memory. We're all milling around after church. I'm always a little bit awkward in those situations. What do I say? Especially then, I was really awkward in like some of those situations. So I'm trying to think of stuff to say to people, and I'm talking after church. And so I went up to Tony and I said goodbye to him because I was coming back to the United States at that point. And Tony said to me, the last thing that he said to me, so Isaac, I'm going to be there. When the dead are raised, when Christ returns, after this age is done, around the throne of God, I'm going to be there. He said, will I see you there? And I didn't know what to say at first. I was just kind of like, well, yeah, you're going to see me there. Yeah, I believe in Jesus. You're going to see me there. Right? And then we talked a little bit more. I said my last goodbyes. And just before I turned to walk away, he asked me one more time. He said, Isaac, will I see you there? And I think this hallway is in a church that's actually quite old. I think the building of this church is about 300 years old. The building that you're looking at through the hallway is across the street. That building is about 800 years old. It's in Oxford. St. Ebbe's Church, if you ever want to check it out. And it's an amazing church. If you're visiting there, I highly recommend. He asked me, will I see you there? He had baptized many people. He had been through Bible studies with hundreds of people who had said, yes, I believe in Jesus, I want to follow him. Not all of those people followed Jesus. Sometimes people get baptized and disappear. He said, will I see you there? And I said a little bit more firmly, yes, you will see me there. I'm going to hold to this truth that I know right now. I'm going to keep following it. And I turned and walked down the hallway. And I got down almost to the end of the hallway, and I didn't know why he did this at the time. He did it because it's what Jesus did to Peter. I got down to the end of the hallway, and so he's maybe like as far as this gym is from me, and he yells down the hallway. And people are still mingling after church. He yells, Isaac, will I see you there? And I was super embarrassed, number one. What do you say in that moment? But I did it. I knew what he wanted. So I screwed up my courage, and I yelled as loud as I could, you will see me there. And then I left. And I was still terrified. Actually, I prayed that night to God. I'm like, I don't know. Can I keep following you? I've given you my life. I've asked you into my heart. I want to follow, but it's so hard sometimes, and there's so many distractions in this life. How can I know that I'm going to keep following you, Lord? And what God said to me in that moment is, it doesn't depend on you. It depends on me, he said. All right, what we're going to do today, will I see you there? That's a point in your notes. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at cross and resurrection, and we're just going to go through 1 Corinthians 15, 1 to 11. And all we're going to do today, we're going to read one other section of Scripture that's connected to this, but all we're going to do today is just break this down, these 11 verses and what Paul says here. So Paul was an apostle, early leader in the church. At this point that he's writing this, he's been following God for a long time. Here's what he says. First, I'll read the whole thing to you, and then we'll break it down piece by piece. He says, now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you. So the gospel is the message of Jesus. It's the good news of the Bible, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. Okay, so these people he's talking to had accepted the gospel, they believed it, and they also were starting to live their lives based on it. By this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preach to you. Otherwise, you have believed in vain. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, and then to the 12, that's the rest of the apostles. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time. Jesus, after he had died, appeared alive again to 500 people at the same time. Most of whom are still living. What's Paul saying here? For the people he's writing to originally, you can go talk to them. Don't just take my word for it. These people saw him alive after he had died. Though some have fallen asleep, by which he meant they had died. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me, as to one abnormally born. For I am the least of the apostles, and do not even deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. Whether then it is I or they, the other apostles, this is what we preach, and this is what you believed. All right, so let's go through this. We'll break down the different things that Paul talks about. Number one, he talks about the gospel. He says the most important thing is that they would hold firmly to the message. They would remember it, and they would take their stand on it. That is, they were going to live this life, which is like a battle, right? That's battle imagery. I'm going to take my stand against who? Against Satan, against evil, against everything that would come against God and turn me another way. I'm going to take my stand on the message of the gospel. So what is the message of the gospel? So we're going to remind ourselves of that first. We've talked about this. We talk about this here as 4 pieces. There are 4 parts of the gospel. So here it is. If you've never heard this message or you've forgotten it, here it is. This is what the Bible says is the fundamental message that we need to hang on to. Number 1, there is a God who made everything. He made you and he loves you. There is a God. The beginning of the gospel is God. We talked about springtime earlier. Man, right now it is so easy if you just lift the blinders, if you just ask God to lift the blinders that our culture puts on us. It is so easy to see that there is a God who loves you. Just look at the flowers, look at the trees, look at the people around you in this room right now. He made everything and gave it to us as a gift. We didn't make any of this stuff. Yeah, we took some of it and rearranged it. But we just showed up here one day. Do you remember when your life started? You probably have some point in your life you look back to where your memories began, and at least I feel like this. I felt like this as a kid. I'm just here. Like, what is this place? How did I get here? Where's it going to take me? What is all this about? There is a God who loves you. That's the first point of the gospel. The second point of the gospel is this, that human beings have been divided from God. We are separated from God by our sin. So human beings are sinful. And this is something that if we're honest with ourselves, we all know to be true. You don't even need the Bible to know that this is true. You look around at everything in our culture, everyone around us, right? And people are all trying to fix the problems that are wrong. Why are there so many problems? Why is there so much wrong inside of me, if you're honest with yourself? Because you are sinful, you've chosen to turn away from God's way. It's not just that you're a victim. It's not just that I'm a victim. It's that we've actually chosen to turn away from God. That's a hard thing to accept. But the third point of the gospel is this, that God sent his own son, Jesus, to make a way back. To make a way back to him. Jesus came and died on the cross. We've been talking about this for 6 weeks now, what the cross means. The primary meaning, the primary thing that happened on the cross is that Jesus died in our place. Because we had been separated from God, because we chose to turn away from him, we deserved death. We deserved a kind of death that we can't even really imagine. But Jesus took that for us. He accepted it willingly, even though he didn't deserve it. And he made a way for us to come back to God. Can I get a hallelujah? He made a way for us to come back to God. All we have to do is receive it. So the fourth point of the gospel, we talk about this. We've talked about this sometimes as a question mark. The fourth point of the gospel is, what are you going to do? Are you going to accept and believe that and take your stand on it? Are you going to receive the gift that God has given you, or are you going to live separated from God? If you live separated from God, there is no hope, ultimately. This life that we live right now is really just a moment. So that's the gospel, and what he says is you gotta cling to that first of all. You gotta hold to it. Hold firmly to the word that was preached. That's the first point you can write in. If you got the notes, super fun. If you're here on site, you can fill in the blanks. You can try to guess what they are ahead of time if you want. Hold firmly to the word that was preached. If you are a believer, there has been some moment in your life where you were reading the Bible, or where God answered a prayer for you, or where you were talking with someone else or listening to someone speak the gospel, maybe many points where you knew it was true. The Spirit of God came and witnessed, spoke to your spirit, and you said, yes, I believe this is true. And then you came and you hopefully, you got into the waters of baptism, you proclaimed it publicly. I believe in Jesus, I'm going to follow him forever. But the first point that Paul brings to us here is the gospel, and that we've got to hold firmly to it. This world, this life is going to try to distract us, take us 10 million different ways. We've got to hold firmly to the word that was preached. The cross and resurrection. The next thing that he says, okay? So I said earlier, right, when I had left that hallway, and my buddy Tony, Pastor Tony, although they don't call him pastors over there, they call him vicars, which is so weird. So weird. But anyway, Tony had, said, will I see you there? I said, yes, you will see me there. But was I confident? Was I confident that I could get myself there? That I could keep on following God the rest of my life? No. Should I have been confident that I could? Not really. Not in myself. My confidence has to lie in him. He's the one who can hold me, who can keep me on the right path, even to help me follow him. I need him to help me follow him. So what Paul says next, right after he said, you guys got to hold firmly to this message. If you don't, everything you said you believed could be in vain. You got to hold firmly to it. I'm sure the people reading this for the first time could have said, but how can I? How can I get myself to hold firmly to it? I can't do it, Paul. So the next thing that he says is, let me tell you what's the most important. The most important is that you remember the cross and the resurrection. Because that's the power. It's what Jesus did on the cross, and as he sealed that, proved that he was the Son of God, that he had actually defeated death. He proved it by coming back to life from the dead. When those things happen, that's where the power comes from to follow him. So we're going to read through it now from the Gospel of Matthew. It's another book in the New Testament that records the life of Jesus. First, the cross. As they were going out, so now Jesus has been arrested, he's been put on trial, he's been condemned by the governor of Judea to die by crucifixion, which was the Roman method of execution for the worst criminals. And now he's got to carry his cross. Remember what he had said to his disciples when he was going to Jerusalem? He's in Jerusalem at this point. He said, if you want to be my disciple, what do you have to do? Deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. Literally, pick it up and carry it. And that's literally what he's doing now. He's carrying his cross. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. Jesus was so weak from being beaten all night and his torture and arrest that he couldn't actually carry it by himself all the way. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. This is where criminals were executed. And they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. This would have dulled his senses. It would have made it easier to take the pain of the cross. Having been beaten all night and whipped and lots of stuff that's really hard for us to imagine, he refuses a painkiller as he's about to be nailed to the cross. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. This was predicted about him as far back as 700 years before his birth. It had been predicted that they would cast lots for his clothing. Sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Ironic, isn't it? That was the charge against him. It was also the truth. Sometimes God uses people who don't believe in him, who hate him, to speak the truth. 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. These are people who had committed insurrection. They tried to start a revolution, probably committed murder as well. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross if you're the Son of God." He had at this point spoken publicly and declared himself to be the Son of God. He had also said publicly that if they destroy this temple, he will rebuild it in 3 days. They thought he was talking about the building made out of stone. He was talking about his body. He was talking about the fact that if they kill him, he would come back to life. In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. He saved others, they said. They admit it. His enemies admit that he had saved others. Probably many of these people had been there when he publicly called Lazarus out of the tomb. Just the week before, he had raised a man from the dead who had been dead for 4 days. And now they're going to kill him. That is not a smart idea. You got to think this guy's coming back. But they said, he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross and we'll believe in him then. He trusts God. Let God rescue him. Now, if he wants him. By saying these things, they're actually quoting. They didn't even know it. They were quoting a piece of Psalm 22. Written hundreds and hundreds of years before this. They're accidentally quoting it, attacking Jesus. He said, I'm the Son of God. In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Well, or at least one of them did. From noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over the land. There was a solar eclipse when he died, apparently. That should have scared them. It did, actually. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Everybody thought, well, some people couldn't understand him, and they thought he was calling Elijah, because he said Eli. Some people who could understand him thought he was saying, God has abandoned me and I've lost all hope. He's quoting the beginning of Psalm 22. Psalm 22 ends with the Messiah rising from the dead and taking over the whole world. As he dies on the cross, he's saying to anyone who really knows their Bible, I'm conquering sin and death. When some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. When Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. He chose the moment that he would die. Normally took days or weeks to die on a cross. He just decided, now I die. At that moment, the curtain of the temple in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem was a massive curtain. Look at these curtains behind you. Say, it's not like those. Way bigger, way thicker. Not the kind that could be torn. And suddenly, for no apparent reason, this curtain tears in two from top to bottom. It's a demonstration to the Jewish people that now the way is open to God. The earth shook, the rocks split, the tombs broke open. Other people rose from the dead when Jesus died on the cross. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city, appearing to many people. Could you imagine being in Jerusalem at that time? And you're just like, wait, who is that? Isn't that like your great-grandfather? When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified. This is the people who had just nailed him to the cross. How would you feel if you nailed somebody to the cross? You're killing this guy, and then the sky gets dark. There's an earthquake. Surely he was the Son of God, they exclaimed. Many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Joseph, Mary the mother of Zebedee's sons. Now, we jump forward. Saturday's happened. Now it's Sunday morning. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake again, and an angel of the Lord came down from heaven. Going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. We're talking about hardened Roman soldiers who had served in maybe the hardest place in the empire. Judea was a very hard place to serve. So imagine U.S. Marines, the Russian special forces, were terrified and became like dead men because of what happened at the tomb that morning. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen. Just as he said, come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he is risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." It's almost like the angel is saying, good, my job's done. I was supposed to come down here and tell you that. Now I'm out of here. So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell the disciples. What would you feel like in that moment? Probably afraid and yet filled with joy. They're excited. Could this really be true? He's not there. There was an angel. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." The cross and the resurrection are the center. It's where the power comes from. How can you hold firmly and take your stand for the rest of this life on the gospel? By remembering Jesus. By remembering the cross and his resurrection. After this, it took those guys a few days. It took them a little while. They had to sort of take this in, that this guy had really come back to life from the dead. But once it settled down into their thinking, into their beliefs, into how they viewed the world, they realized that none of the stuff that they were afraid of before really mattered. This guy, they killed him, and he didn't stay dead. If I follow him, I'm going to rise just like him. Almost all of those 12 guys who Jesus met with, almost all of them died violent deaths. People killed them because they were preaching about Jesus. And yet they were unafraid. You're going to kill me? So what? I watched this guy die, and I watched him come back to life. I saw him after he came back to life. There is life after this. There is a resurrection of the dead. There is another age that we're living for. If we keep this in front of us, by God's grace, we will be able to hold firmly to the gospel. This is of first importance. The last thing that Paul talks about in this section is so helpful to me. What am I and what is my life? Jump back to the end of that 1 Corinthians passage for me, guys. I just want to read that one more time. Look at this here. He says, first of all, I am the least of all the apostles and do not even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. Do you ever feel unworthy to follow and serve Jesus? I know that I do. In another place, Paul says that he is the worst of all sinners, not even the least of the apostles, but the worst of all sinners is how he viewed himself. Yet, he knows and believes that even though that's true, God has a role for him, and by God's grace, he can accomplish it. Check this out. He says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. This is actually the attitude that we're supposed to have. We come to God. He's done everything for us. We can't even keep ourselves on track. We have to depend on him even for that. And then he comes and he says, here's what I want you to do in your life. I want you to obey the teachings of Jesus. You guys know what many of those are. We're not going to go through all of his teachings today. That's impossible. Forgive people who've harmed you. That's what our whole message was about on Friday. Forgive people that you're extremely bitter and resentful against. That's very hard to do. It seems impossible to do. I'm not worthy to follow this calling. Tell other people the message of Jesus. I've talked with a bunch of people lately who say, I want to follow Jesus, but I'm afraid. Like, how do I tell other people about him? That seems so scary. What am I supposed to do? It doesn't depend on us. We should feel that way. We are unworthy of the calling that he's given us. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. So this is like a huge secret to life, a secret to life in Christ, right? And we're going to jump back to that next point. By the grace of God, I am what I am. And the one following that, Darren, jump there. By the grace of God, I am what I am. It's only by his grace. You can write that in your bulletin, in your notes. And then this huge secret to life, we don't have to do things perfectly. We don't even have to be fully competent. We can't be. We're not worthy of the calling he's given us. What we have to do is give it our best shot. All we have to do is step out in faith, follow God as hard as we know how, and yes, it's not going to be good enough, not even close, but his grace is going to work in me when I do that. That's the message. That's how we hold firmly. So God gives us this incredible gift in Jesus. He says, hold firmly to the gospel. We say, I can't. He says, it doesn't matter. It's me. He says, here's what I want you to do in your life. I say, I can't possibly do those things. That's terrifying. When I was in that hallway, I knew already some of the things that God was calling me to do. And I was terrified of it. I was terrified of it. But it doesn't depend on us. Here's what Paul says. He felt exactly the same way. He felt like, I cannot possibly do this. But all I do is I just go for it. That's what faith is. Just go for it. Just put all my work and my energy into it as much as I can, going after the thing that God has asked me to do. And when I feel like I've totally failed, when I feel like I'm completely weak and powerless, that's when God shows up. And that's when he works through me. I work hard, and his grace works in me. So, we're going to wrap up by asking you this question. Most of you here, if you haven't yet given your life to Christ, you've heard the gospel today, you maybe need to go through a Bible study, you may need to learn a lot, you have a lot of questions, come to us. Fill out that connect form on Gethope.ca. We will start a new class whenever you're ready. We'll go through this, we'll answer all the questions just like I went through when I first became a believer. But most of us who are in this room have given our lives to Jesus. Many of us who are in this room have been baptized. If you've given your life to Jesus and you haven't been baptized, guess what? Next week, there could be more than 5. That's what you're supposed to do. That maybe that's the next thing he's calling you to do. That's the hard thing you're terrified of. But he says, if you believe, be baptized. That's what he says. But for all of us who have been baptized, we've given our lives to him, we're trying to hold firmly to the gospel. This is the question. I'm going to be there. When Christ comes back, when the dead are raised and everyone's caught up into the clouds with him, when we're with him in a new age and a new reality, I am going to be there. Not because I'm so good, but because I trust him and I'm going to throw all my energy into following him, even though I'm not very good at it. I'm going to throw all my energy into it, and he is going to show up by his grace and help me. Will you be there? Are you going to throw all of your energy, all of your work into following after Christ? Even though your work is not enough, it's not nearly enough, but are you going to do it? Are you going to hold firmly to what you believed? Will I see you there? This life, it's a blink of an eye. It's a blink of an eye. That hallway for me was 20 2 years ago. That seems like yesterday. I know many of you feel the same way. Guess what's going to happen? Suddenly we're going to be at the end of our life. We're going to look back. Are you going to follow him? Will you be there on that day? Let's pray.